So I spent the last 3 or 4 months trying to build something kind of crazy. Is it possible to achieve multicolor 3D printing on a Ender 3? The main method I've been looking at is coating filaments with ink. You can take 3 primary colors and mix them together to get every single color. It's like a crazy hybrid between a 3D printer and a paper printer. The simplest version of this setup is this passive colorizer. You put the markers in and it colors the filament. This actually works surprisingly well. The only drawback is if you want to change the color, you have to manually take the markers out. I honestly wish I would have stopped here. It would have saved me a ton of headache. But I embarked on the journey and decided to take it one step further and try to automate things. The first thing I needed was ink, so I drilled a hole through my markers, which was actually pretty satisfying. Next, I started experimenting with different ways to add ink to the outside of filament. But it turns out that injecting ink directly into the hot end isn't really a best practice. Hey, you live and you learn. So after that, I needed a plan B. Came up with the idea for a syringe pump. So basically, I would just be pumping the ink directly onto the filament. To do that, I needed to cut some rod. You ever cut some rod? If you're ever cutting rod and you're using the wrong tool, you should probably try and find the correct tool to cut the rod with. Speaking from experience. Next thing you know, there's a syringe pump sitting on my voltmeter. Voltmeters actually make excellent syringe pump stands, by the way. The next step was to add a nozzle to the syringe pump so it could be compatible with the filament. The results were kind of promising, but it appeared that there was some other latent issues that I needed to solve. My 3D printer was getting destroyed, but I kept going and multiplied everything by 3, one chamber for each of the primary colors. The result is this crazy looking thing. In all honesty, this thing should have never existed. I'd been working on this project for so long that I just kind of put my blinders on, iterating without trying to understand what's going wrong. The same problem was there from before. Pretty much my printer was getting coated with ink more than the filament was. To solve that issue, I finally realized I needed to change the ink. Along with that, I wanted to decrease the reliability issues, so I threw everything out and went to a peristaltic pump setup. Peristaltic pump uses silicone tubes and a rotor to push fluid through the pump. This also took me about a week and a half to figure out. Yada yada yada, multiply by 3, and now we are at the beginning of the video. I'm calling this thing the Spectrum Colorizer. It uses fast drying alcohol ink and coats the outside of filament. Here you can see it in action. You can kind of see it's mixing the blue and the magenta on both sides of the filament, so when I pan the camera you can see both colors. So those two colors should mix, and my results kept getting better and better. The prints were coming out very bright and vibrant, and I was getting less of those issues with reliability and clogging throughout the entire system. So this is like version 11. I printed it with a nice purple PLA. Functionally, it has slightly bigger internal parts to make things even more reliable. It can pump quite a bit of ink fairly reliably. Here you can see everything in action. Each little notch on the filament is a different pumping period. You can see how consistent everything is with those notches at those intervals. The main issue with this type of thing, ink inclusion. For this to be a mainstream product, I think the ink formulation would have to be modified. The ink dries so quickly that if you leave it sitting out, it kind of just dries inside the tubes and just creates a whole bunch of problems. I tried diving into the chemistry of the ink formulations, but after all that work I was pretty just burned out, so I kind of quit iterating on it. There's a full GitHub repo in the description if you want to try and print this out and make some improvements to it. Yeah, like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope someone takes this and makes it amazing.